Yeah,
Great.
I never understood that myself.
If you were like out in Tucson, maybe you could be like, it's gonna be sunny, and be like, yep, accurate.
All right. So for those of you who don't know, this is one of my most favorite things to ever install on your Chrome or Firefox browser, and it's called Gitpod. And when you install it as an extension, it gives you this cool green button right here on GitHub, where you can literally open up any Git repository without having to download it to your machine. You still do npm install just like you would if it was on your machine, but it doesn't do anything, and it doesn't go to Git, doesn't save to GitHub unless you tell it to by like git add and all that stuff.
That's
But it's
nifty.
like, what's that?
That's nifty.
Oh, it so is. And as a TL, like Virginia remembers this, I'm sure. I think I did hers once or twice. This is how I checked all their projects and sprint work. Instead of downloading everybody's project that's named the exact same thing, having to make 1,000 folders, I could just do this. And it looks just like VS Code when it actually gets up and running. It does take a minute to open, but once it's open, it behaves and acts just like VS Code, which is nice. I just have to wait for it to get up and running. Can you guys hear me better though this time?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
much better.
All right. Good. Really am sorry about that.
It's no need to be. It's fine.
There we go.
Virtual anything. That'll happen.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, so we're gonna do a quick npm install. So this was a very simple, and I do mean very simple, weather app that we built that's a good way to, because it was all, this is all for Unit 2, so it was a good way to start learning about some of state management. Along with, let me see, there was an API call in here. Oh, I guess it would help if I switched branches because that still has the old Lambda branch. Once I switch branches. But this was installed using lambda-react instead of create-react-app. Something that a fellow TL did or created. All right. I hate Zoom controls. All right, so git checkout, and it should be Melissa. There we go. All right, so npm start. This was, like I said, it's a really basic weather app. We have the Lambda's weather, and then we had weather where I live, because I live someplace else. I live in Pennsylvania, so. But we have on the app page, and it's always recommended to keep your app page, your app.js page, as clean as possible and not have too many functions sitting on it, because you want to be able to create as many reusable functions as possible. Oh, I guess it would help if I did the other npm install. Let's switch branches. But to have is, like I said, to have it as clean as possible and not have functions on this page, just because you want to be able to use them. So we created a home page using React Router DOM and a Berwick page. Now for state management, like I was saying before, or I was trying to say before anyways, it's if you think about a web page in terms of a person, the HTML of a web page is like the bones, the skeleton. It's what holds it all together. CSS is the clothing that we wear, it's the makeup we put on, things we do to our hair, things like that. Where JavaScript is what makes us physically move. It's our brain. It's what makes everything function and actually do things. State management is along those same lines. It is something on the page is going to change, and we need to use state management to tell it how and what. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, now we should actually see something. Hey, there we go. So with the Lambda weather, it should show the temperature at Lambda right now. Did I click it? I don't know if I clicked it or not. If not, I did now. But I can also go in here. And we're gonna make this nice and small. So here our state management is just this. It's just this one thing right here. We are going to be using the two states of data and set data. Inside our Axios call, we're getting the URL that we placed up here. And we only placed it up here because this was going to be a URL we were going to use over again and just change this last piece of information. The latitude and longitude of the location we were wanting to pull the weather back on. When we looked at this data, copy. I don't know why my things aren't hiding. This is what the data pulls back as. And this was one thing that a lot of people have trouble getting back. And I recommend to do any GET requests that you do, either in Postman or in Firefox, because Firefox lays it out like this, where Chrome does not. And this makes it a lot easier to see. But you can see that when the data is returned, there's a whole lot of different, all these little things they close. Oh, in geometry, I think that says geometry, right? Yeah. There isn't much in there that we really need, that we really wanted to pull back. It's just pulling back some latitude and longitude things. This is telling us how it's being pulled back. The metrics it's pulling back in Celsius. Here we can actually see that right now at Lambda, the air temperature is 16 degrees Celsius, only because we know up here it said Celsius. So on here, we didn't need anything until this block, the time series. So we narrowed our call down to the first index in time series. And then we pulled back, helps if I guess I uncomment this. Here's our air temperature. And then this piece right here is our formula to actually change it over to Fahrenheit. So we actually knew what it was saying, because I don't read Celsius. And this is a nifty HTML code to get you the degrees. So if I hit save over here, this should refresh. Why is it not refreshing? Data not defined, that's why. Because it's being silly again today. But for some reason, the data on a lot of these weather ones, they have a lot of trouble resolving the data every single time. However, I learned a little trick. You comment it out and comment it back in, and it works. So comment out, save, and okay, and then comment it back in and save. Obviously that doesn't work for a actual live working application, but now you can see that our temperature here says 61 degrees. And we used state management by setting the data right here to whatever this URL pulls back. I know a lot of people had a lot of questions this past unit 2. For those that are just finishing up unit 2, they had a lot of problems with Axios calls and figuring out when to use map and when not to use map and things like that. Does anybody have any specific questions on, or can they explain why you would map through as opposed to how I do it right here where it's not mapping through?
I'd assume we want to be using a map when we have a whole bunch of data that we're getting back rather than just one temperature.
Well, we are getting a whole bunch of data. If I were to, do I have the console log in there still? Yes, I do. So if I look at the console, it should be showing me the console log, and it does pull back a lot of data, but it's a matter of how the data is pulled back. So right here, you can see my data is pulled back as an object. And because I have it being pulled back as an object, I don't have to map through it. If it was being pulled back as an array of objects, I would have to map through it. Does that make sense? Nope, I didn't do it on this one. That's right. So this one is just returning an object with data in it because I went down to here and this index. So it's just pulling back this information from the first index. If I pulled it back to just time series, it would be pulling back an array with a couple different indexes, in which case I would have to map through to pull back just say the air temperature at whatever index I wanted to display, or to show all the indexes. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yep. Does anybody have any specific questions about Unit 2 stuff that they wanted to go over today?
I'm just here to absorb, so whatever you get into is helpful.
The exact same reason that I'm here for. It's just because for every person that explains something that we've already gone over, they'll explain it in a different way.
Oh, I've got tons
usually
of
you pick up one thing here or there.
Yeah.
I had a tough time with the way that Sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Oh, I was just saying that Unit 1, I related to one of the instructors very well. Unit 2, the instructor form style, and it's not a criticism, it was just too much for me. It didn't work with the way my brain thinks. So yeah, it's helpful to hear it multiple ways.
I absolutely agree. I use analogies all the time because equating something to real life makes it easier for me to understand what it's doing. And it's also another form of pseudocode for me. So like if I were to ask you to explain what an Axios call is, a GET request is, you could probably explain it in technical terms because you know what code needs to be there, but trying to explain it in pseudocode or plain English isn't always as easy. For me, an Axios call is, I'm going to go to the library. I'm going to find the proper book that I need to research volcanoes. And then I'm going to find what I need and then write it on a piece of paper so that I can then take that paper and write my report. And the Axios call sends back that piece of paper for me, which then I can then display in my report. Or I can display portions of what I wrote on that paper in my report. You know, and then if I needed to add something to it, which would be a post request, I can. It's not a set in stone, as long as it's a database, of course. It's not a set in stone piece of paper. I can always go back to that Axios call or go back to a different Axios call, a different book, add that information, and thus then display the new information as well. Same thing with update and delete. Granted, if I'm writing in pen, obviously the update's probably not going to work as well. So analogies aren't perfect, but it gives you an idea of some of the ways to do it. And breaking down, I know once, if you're not already in CS when you get there, pseudocode is extremely important. And I wish I had learned that like back in Unit 2. Because Python was very, very hard for me, still is. And it's because it was like JavaScript back in Unit 1. I can't see what JavaScript is doing. I can't see what Python is doing like I can with HTML and CSS. If I tell the CSS to change the font color red, it's going to change it red and I can see it does that. And if I type red wrong, it does nothing. Yes, if I type a function wrong, it's not going to do anything, but I can't tell why it's not doing anything as easily as red is spelled wrong. So when it came to React for me, it was a lot easier because all of a sudden the JavaScript was now being displayed or used to display things. So now it made a little more sense. Python still kicks my butt because I still have a hard time visualizing it. So that's where I learned within the Python CS parts to pseudocode more. Okay, I need to break down what he told me during lecture into plain English so that I can retranslate it back into code later, but into terms that I'll understand so that I know what wording to use. You know, like how far is anybody beyond Unit 2 in here? Or are you guys all Unit 2? Okay.
Yeah, I think all of us are Unit 2.
No, and that's fine. That's fine. So like in Unit 3, you're going to learn Advanced React. A lot of the functions are the same. You're still going to be using a lot of the same things that you used in Unit 2. You're just going to be adding some new stuff to it. You know, the basic CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. Those functions will stay the same. And believe it or not, when you go to backend, if you're Node, they're actually still the same. Worded slightly differently, but structured the exact same way. You're going to get information from the database instead of an API. And then you're going to allow it to be viewed. Instead of actually displaying it, you're going to give it the permissions to be viewed, basically. And then for posting, you're going to say, okay, we're going to go to this database. If this is not here, then we're going to add it. So a lot of the things, they stay the same. It's just worded slightly differently, which is one of the things I really liked about Node. So there's my plug for Node. I don't know anything about Java, so I can't help you there.
Melissa, I had a question.
Yeah, what's up?
Do you think you can quickly demonstrate like how to use Postman or HTTP? Because during class, like sometimes we would like play around with endpoints, but I never really understood like the usefulness of that if we didn't already know like what data we had access to through the API, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't play with HTTP only because I've never gotten it to work on my computer, and I didn't even hear about it until Unit 4. Actually, until when I was a TL as Web 35, when they went into Unit 2. That's when I first heard about HTTP. But yeah, I can absolutely show you. I believe it's very similar with Postman. So let me shut this one down real quick. And then I can pull up an API that I actually have running. Let me stop that part. And then we're gonna go. I really like Postman because I can make my documentation for the backend through Postman really easily. Let me just let that load. All right, where's a good one to use? That one will work. And here is copy. And then, so while Postman is loading, I will show you this part of it. So I don't know how much you guys have looked into any of the server files or not, that have been part of any of your projects. But here's an example of, you're either going to look for the index.js or a server.js file. And it's going to tell you when you go towards the bottom of it, in something like this, what routes are available. So this is telling me that /projects, there is going to be information available to me. And at /types, there's going to be information available to me. Doesn't tell me what, but at least it tells me, I know that these are 2 endpoints here. And then, where'd it go? There it is. Just like in React, this part right here is telling me something from up above. It's like my component. So if I looked right here, project router, types router, I can see exactly where the files are located. It's written slightly differently, but it still tells you where things are written, just like in React does. So if I go back to the routers folder, you can see, I can briefly show you what they look like, and it shouldn't confuse you too much. It might actually help. All right, So he's up and running. So every API has its base link. Come on. There it is. So this was the base link that I had just pulled from the README doc. And if I do a get on the base link, it should tell me, in this case, because it's a live link, it should tell me that it is, the server is up and running. It might take it a minute to come back, but once the server wakes up. And whenever you're playing with any sort of API link, that is one of the first things you want to do, is always check to make sure that a simple GET request on the base link is working. So we're going to do raw, because that's a lot of information that gets confusing. And it should just tell me, should say in there that it's just running. Might have to do the visualize to see it. Yep, there it is. Oh, I see what it's doing. Okay. So either way, it's getting information back. So if I do, what was one of the routes? It was what, projects, I think it said? Projects. Yep, I've been there before. I do a GET request on the projects route that we had seen. It's going to send me back data. Why is it making it so hard to see today? There we go. So it's sending me back data. And sometimes you'll see that what you see on these router files, sometimes you'll see them in the server file too for some of the projects. So we're going to go to the project router so you can see what it looks like to understand it a little bit. All right. So here's my GET request. And this is saying at /, because that's where I told it to go /projects in the previous file. I want you to go to the projects table, find everything, and then return the data. Here's one where I can pull it for the ID, where, you know, remember when we had the friends, you can pull back the friends, or you can pull back one friend. That's what this one's doing, is just the one friend in this case, or one project. Down here, there's also the put and post. Post is adding. So here I'm going to go to the projects table and add whatever I put in my body, and then return all the data. This one, I have to use the ID to update, but I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm telling it to update it and then return the data. And this one does slightly different. It's only going to tell me that I removed the project. It's not going to return any data, where this one has JSON data project. This one has JSON with a message saying you removed the project. Because I don't need to return all the data at that point. I just want to make sure that I removed it. And I added all these through a post request. Is there anything specific you want to just see on how to do it, or like how to add a project type of thing in this case?
I just wanted to see the process of how you can explore like a base API or like a base URL, if you didn't know that there was a project section, like how would you use Postman to explore like what is in that link and like different endpoints?
So every API has to have some sort of documentation. Where is my, that, I didn't mean projects. That was, now this one, because it's my own API, I don't have documentation, but unless you can see the source code, they have to provide you with documentation. So what's what was it, recandres.in, I think it is. Recres.in, I think it's one of the APIs that we use a lot at Lambda. If I type that into the browser itself, and this is actually what you should see on most base URLs. The only reason you didn't in mine is because it's an internal one. It's not meant for the public, but this is what you would get. And it's going to tell you right in here, if you want to do a GET request, it'll list the users. You can list a single user, and it should tell you exactly, like here it says the request is /API/users. If you wanted to do this one, it's going to be just a user 2. A list, that's what that route is. So this one has something that's very easy to see and documentation of how exactly to use their API. For a post request, you have to give it some information. And then if you gave it the right information, you should get this type of response. Does that help?
Yeah, I think seeing a chart like this helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is one of the ones that Lambda uses all the time, the RecRes. They're the two homies is what a lot of us call them, because in backend you have to put RecRes on every get, post, delete, update request. So we call them the homies because they're always there. But you should see some sort of documentation like this. Like I said, the only reason you didn't on mine is because it's nobody else is going to use it but me, so I didn't need to create documentation for it because it's just me. And that was just for my portfolio, is what that API was for. Someone had posted in that slide, in the Slido link that I had shared, that they had questions about how to organize folders. There's no set way to organize folders. It's up to you how you organize them. Everything should be is typically inside the components folder, except for the app.js and the index.js. But inside the components folder, how you organize it is completely up to you. Me, I go folder crazy. Like I put any components that have to do with the navigation into a nav folder inside the components. If I have multiple pages that are doing kind of the same thing, but need different, like, I don't know, API calls, for example, like one of my weather applications that I did was for my family. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. We live all over the United States. That's a lot of weather and a lot of API calls. So I had a folder for every member of my family so that I could keep the API calls separate, but like reuse the same format with, because like I wanted to display the exact same information, it's just for a different location. So I separated it by folders. That was how I kept it organized for myself. How you organize it is up to you. I keep my CSS in a CSS folder. Like how you see the app.css and index.css. I don't use those. I put them in a CSS folder right there. And that's where I keep all my CSS documents because I like it nice, neat, and organized. That, and it makes it a lot easier for me to find it later on. But I also use less. I don't use just plain CSS anymore because less is easier for me to see because it's indented and everything's nested just like it is in HTML. So it's a lot easier for me to find where my navigation styling is, because I can go down and I can say, okay, I'm in the app div, then I'm in the header div, then I'm in the navigation div, and I can just easily find it nested in there. And it's a lot easier for me to see it because it's just like in HTML, it's nested inside its parent components. Less does that for you as well. And it makes it easier for me to see it. Let me see. Another question that was posted was about the app.js and the index.js. No, you do not have to use both of them. But you can. All that's really going to be in the index.js is your main router. Because if you ever notice that, if you ever try to use React Router DOM without wrapping everything inside of a router, it won't work. So a lot of people put that in the index and leave it be. And then they can do the switch and route inside of app.js. But it has to be, you have to use at least one of those to display everything. Sometimes it's easier to keep those two separate parts separate, but you don't have to. Another question that was posted was understanding where data and information is being pulled from in React. And the best advice I have for that is to look at React apps, their source code anyways. And then have the source code on one side of your screen and then the live code or the live site on the other side. So you're on your home screen, you know, the landing page, and then you look at the source code and you say, okay, I know from experience, I'm probably gonna be looking for the app.js to find where everything's being pulled into. And then you look at that and break it down. Okay, this part looks like it could be the header. Here's the main body content. Here's the footer. And then you can see what files are being imported at the top. And just basically trace it back. If you have React DevTools installed, that can help as well. But sometimes that can get confusing as well. Only because React DevTools sometimes words things funny. But the best advice to figure out where everything is getting its information from is literally just to look through completed React apps. Feel free to look through my repositories and have a go and see if you can follow them. A lot of mine have live sites, or go to my portfolio. My portfolio has the live sites and their source code right linked next to each other. So you can actually pull them up and look at them both and see what's the difference. And I'll put that, I'll show you guys real quick. Ooh, helps if I type it right. I'll show you really quick. And this is my portfolio. It's just melissa-longenberger.com. And my current projects, it might take a minute to pull up, but because this is a different server. But I have a note that says, hey, it's firing up the server to get my projects. Come on. There it goes. But like, here's the site, here's a site. I've got the source code and I've got a link to the live version to all of my projects that are on the current side. So you can look and see how I did it and what's different about it. So I feel free to take a look and learn it, so to speak. Another one that was posted was about how to an example of reusing components. Let me see, what's a good example of that? Oh, here's one. This is a reusable component right here. I built what I wanted to display from the API, and then it's repeated on the page to display everything from the API. So that in and of itself is a reusable component. Right here, these 3 boxes are also reusable components. They also do the same thing. They're pulling information from an API, and it's just one file, and then that is repeated because I'm using .map. That's all I had for right now. But I'll be back on again next Wednesday, same time. And
Alright.
and I'm gonna post another Slido link, or probably the same one, for next week as well, so that you guys can add any questions if you guys wanted to, because I figured that's the easiest way to get some questions started anyways. And then,
Thank you very much.
oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Yep, and I'm gonna be continuing these after the break. I think they're just gonna be on Mondays and Wednesdays instead. Probably about the same time. I'm trying to make it so that full-time can participate, but so can part-time students. So, and I posted a link to the YouTube channel that these will all be saved on, all the recordings and stuff like that. So, all right, I will
All right.
talk to you guys later then.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Yeah, no problem.
Take care.
All right.